All right, so I'm not going to beat everyone up over security news. God knows there's enough of it because we missed a month, so we've got more than enough we can talk about. We could talk all night about events in the security world, but I just grabbed some of the more recent ones just because they're fresh in our minds. But let's just jump right in. So attacks and breaches. Unfortunately, this is a never-ending story. We always have attacks and breaches. One of the first ones I keyed in on was the UN shipping agency that was actually forced offline due to a cyber attack. I always love some of the terms they use when they describe some of these things, like undergoing some technical issues. That's just what a great thing to give in a press statement. We might as well be very honest about what it is. We all know, we can read through the smoke and mirrors. The most important thing I drew out of this one is the last highlighted area. Um, and the reason I highlighted it, and I've shared this with a couple of other people, is they had, ISO certification for its information security management. So a lot of people are of the firm belief that if you have fill in the blank certification accreditation, that makes you bulletproof somehow. And that's not a true statement. Anybody who's been doing cybersecurity for more than an hour and a half knows that it means you're not the lowest hanging fruit on the tree, but by no means can no one not reach you. So this was a good article to emphasize that. Just because you have some sort of certification for your environment doesn't mean that you're bulletproof. And I think if we were to really look at a lot of the breaches that have occurred over the last couple of months, we would see this as a real common thing. It's just not highlighted often in an article. So this was interesting that it was actually brought up in the article. New APT group operating out of GMT +2 +3, just so everyone knows, is like Germany in that range. But they're going after the Russians. Moldova, Siberia, Russia, Ukraine have been under attack by this group. Not a whole lot of information about it. Still some very interesting things coming out of it. One of the most interesting, I think, is that this is one of those one that's actually being talked about, that instead of it being one of those Eastern Bloc countries that we always hear about attacking the world, this is somebody else attacking them. So part of me wanted to say, you reap what you sow. So here it is. Again, interesting things that they point out. They use, the same malware architecture for 9 years. And, that's very unusual. I don't think it is. If it's not broke, why are they going to change it? So again, interesting watching how people analyze things, and this gets into some of those things that we talk about when threat hunting. I like to caution a lot of people who do threat hunting, not everything is an APT threat, and even if it was an APT threat, how does it mean you can handle it differently than the 13-year-old down the block doing the same attack? Does it really make a difference in how you respond? So just a couple of things to think about. Ransomware, again, if you have not read Microsoft's latest report on some of their attacks and things like that, it's a good read. This one came out of a different report, but they all have been touting the same thing. Ransomware is becoming the #1 attack that everyone is seeing. And these attacks aren't necessarily where they get in and meander for days, weeks, months. They can be very quick. In this particular case, they talk about in under 45 minutes. I think part of that goes back to how much data do you have that they want to exploit and take from you. Most of the ransomware attacks that I've seen as of late and have firsthand, very close to firsthand knowledge on, the attackers spent a lot of time in the environment sucking out all the data they can. And that means that even if you do get back your systems, you're liable to have the next problem of you still don't have all your data. Somebody's got a copy of it. Therefore, now they're going to blackmail you to keep it from being published. And how long can they do that for? Well, they can honestly keep that coming to you for money until either you've got no more money, or B, until the data is not worth anything. So this is a really bad position to find yourself in, depending on what kind of data may have gotten exploited. One of the challenges with answering that question for senior management about what data you know, what data did the bad guys get? Anybody in incident response hears this all the time. Well, what did the bad guys get a hold of? And unfortunately, senior management usually expects us to produce a list saying, we know they accessed these files and this is the data they got. We know 100% that this is what happened. And that doesn't happen in the real world, not often. And the reason for that is because we have, you know, we monitor a lot of things by looking for failures of audits, not by valid read audits. If you are doing, you know, read audits on an object, it means you got a lot of disk space and a lot of time, because some of those objects get hit an awful lot. So for the most part, we do things on the where it's failed, and then once we've gotten it there, we try to go back and say, what does this failure mean? So
Oops.
yes.
Hey, Eric, really quick, just to add on to that, I didn't know if you were going to bring up, you probably are going to bring it up on the next thing, which is that Ars Technica had an article, I'll post it in the chat, about some new policies that if you do pay the ransom and it's to certain kinds of individuals, certain kinds of APT groups, that you could actually end up being fined by the Fed. So I'll post that in the thing here just as an add-on. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, good. And actually, I do have a news article on that as well, but I have not read the technical article you're talking about. So it's always good to have multiple sources. So again, continuing with malware and ransomware, universal health systems took a big hit. The real scope of how bad it impacted them, this article didn't go into. Again, there were, you know, rumors and Twitter that they were turning people away from hospitals. I don't know how true or not true that is. So again, take some of these articles with a grain of salt. I will tell you, from working with people that are in the healthcare industry, you know, one of the challenges is not so much protecting the computers that are used for what I'll call administrative. Those can typically have receive patches and get updates and have security software loaded on them. Where you find you start having problems is the devices, effectively, that are plugged into some of the hospital networks. And if they're not properly isolated off, effectively what a lot of those is it's a PC connected to, pick your favorite healthcare device. And those are not as well updated. In fact, some of them can be pretty scary. From some firsthand knowledge from a couple of years ago, I witnessed numerous of them still running Windows XP long after it expired, yet they were plugged into the enterprise network. So again, the healthcare environment can be a real challenge to secure some of this, where proper segmentation hasn't been done. And to be perfectly honest, in my opinion, you need to force these vendors that it's great that you have this computer. It's got to stay up to date. It's got to stay patched. You can't tell me I can't patch it, because, you know, if you're going to use the technology, you have to support the technology. And again, no surprise here, federal agency compromised by a cyber actor. Some of the scary points of this article were that the attacker used valid login credentials for multiple users on Office 0365. Doesn't surprise me. Probably indicates that it started off with a phishing campaign. They got phished. What scares me is domain administrators' accounts to gain access to the agency's enterprise network. The first thing that popped into my mind reading that second paragraph is, where is the two-factor authentication? You know, it sounds like, and again, we're reading an article here, but it sounds like there was no two-factor authentication. This is really, really bad. This is something that even Microsoft recommends that you do with some of these things like O365. Not only did they get persistent access, but they use you know, a SOX proxy to move the data out. And that's pretty, again, you know, why do we have a SOX proxy that's that wide open that anything can talk to it and anything can move in any direction? Those are things that definitely I would pick apart as a problem in this. And again, excuse me, the last part I highlighted here is, in this case, it looks like they identified the tentative hole that came in, and it was pulse secure. And again, perimeter devices, we've said this time and time and again in this forum, you know, if you're going to patch, you always patch from the outside in. You got to protect those perimeter devices, and you can't wait. And especially now with a lot of those attacks being, you know, everyone's working remote. There's a lot of people that don't want to patch because, oh, I'm going to disrupt people. On the counter side of that is yes, you're going to disrupt people, but if the bad guy gets in, think of the damage they can do. So again, interesting article, makes me want to ask people a lot more questions. Let's see. All right, healthcare, we're going to pick on it some more. Healthcare apps. This was an article written looking at healthcare apps on the mobile devices, Android and iOS. That's all it looked at. They looked at 100 apps, 50 on each platform, and you know, this is the results of what they found. These are just absolutely terrifying to me. You know, 71% contained at least one high security flaw. You know, and just the sheer numbers just blow me away. You know, 91% of apps mishandled or had weak encryption. You know, 34% of Android, 28% of iOS were vulnerable to encryption key extraction. Those types of things, and I bring up those because encryption is a pet peeve of mine. If you're going to do encryption, you got to do it right. And to be perfectly honest, it's not easy to do it right. I'm one of those people that I push real hard for encryption modules that have been, you know, FIPS validated, and people always give me a hard time. Well, I can get this open source and it'll do it too. And my first comment is, well, who's looked at it to make sure it really is good crypto built in there? And oftentimes the answer is well, no one's looked at it. And okay, maybe it's good, maybe it's not, I don't know, but I'm not going to risk it. And that's only part of the problem. Is once you've got a good security module, crypto module, you need to then also look at, you know, are you implementing it correctly? And the implementation, it's very easy to do things wrong, especially with like stored secrets. So some of these I will, it's a pet, like I said, crypto is a pet peeve of mine. I'll give them a little bit of leeway, but we've been trying to fix this problem for, my God, as long as I've been in cybersecurity. So it's something that needs to be addressed.
Can I add one, or give a slight rephrasing there, Eric?
Please.
So it's not so much the cryptography is hard to do right, but that it's really, really, really easy to do wrong, and really hard to tell when you've done it wrong.
Yes.
Yes.
That's all.
Yeah, that's very true. Education. So talking, you know, current events, talking about education. You know, this is Cyber Awareness Month. This is one of these firms that offered up a bunch of tools. I thought I'd go out and take a look at it. They have a resource kit, but of course it's one of those, you know, give me your phone number, address, and everything else before you get access to it. I kind of have a hard time with that. If you're really trying to help the community, don't hide it behind all these, you know, different things making me sign up and receive emails from you that I'm just going to put in my junk folder. I'm glad that they did do something, but again, let's put it out there and just make it easy to get to, not hide it behind other data collection tools and things like that, especially when you're going to be talking about cybersecurity. Hi, cybersecurity. Watch where you give out information, yet you're going to ask for that information. Kind of ironic.
Eric, all you have to know is for the company behind KnowBe4, the people behind it, they're farming addresses and emails.
Doesn't surprise me. And again, that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of show this one is a great article saying, hey, look, we're here to help you. But when you go off and look at it and see how it's nested back there, yeah, I didn't even actually get to the training material to tell you how whether it's good or bad. So again, for those vendors who may be on the call with us, this is not the way to tout security and that your firm supports it. Just my 2 cents.
And as an aside, isn't Kevin Mitnick on the executive staff of KnowBe4?
Yep.
Yeah.
He is KnowBe4, basically.
Okay. So there's a little bit of extra irony there.
Well, you know what the irony is? He wouldn't even give you one of his famous metal business cards without getting one of your business cards with a phone number on it.
Right.
Thank God for VoIP. All right, so another good article, time to remove security from IT. I have been a big proponent of not having cybersecurity under IT since I started in security. This one, again, pet peeve, I'll be perfectly honest. It's the fox watching the hen house when you have that happen. And again, the two highlighted areas, this is an abbreviated article. I had to edit it down just to fit it on the screen. But the two highlighted areas are really key. You know, the CISO needs to be away from IT. They need to be on peer. And if they have a problem, you know, IT wants it one way, CISO wants it a different way. It takes somebody at the next level to make that decision. What are you going to do? Are you going to make it more secure, or are you going to make it more agile for the business, you know, but less secure? Those are business risks, and it's perfectly acceptable to say, we're not going to do this security and I accept the risk. That is absolutely appropriate for any business, but it requires an educated decision. And I feel that when you've got security under IT, you get a bias towards it. So having them as peers is something I strongly support.
So Eric, how do you deal with security and IT when they're both considered cost centers, and that's all that the management board looks at it as? Is you're a cost center, you guys just belong together?
So again, you know, the way I would put it is first of all, they are cost centers, but they have a conflict of interest on how they're going to spend money. Oftentimes, you know, you'll have IT, we're going to cut corners, and what does that do? That may impact security. So yes, it's the cost of doing business, but those costs need to be weighed. And operational costs can very easily impact security, and security needs to have a voice in that. When they're buried under IT, they lose that voice. So I think you have to have somebody that is, you have to have a separation to where that CISO is free to bring up that risk and say, here is the risk you've created, okay, by doing this IT side. What are you going to do to mitigate that risk? Or are, you know, some more senior management, are you going to accept that risk? This helps to me in a lot of ways to expose some of the things that don't ever get exposed. And again, like I said, it's perfectly acceptable for the business to accept risk. We do it every day. We determine how much we're going to do, what we're going to patch first. Okay, we determine if we're going to patch it. We may say, hey, I've got this environment that it's so buried so deep and it's got so many layers of firewalls, I'm not going to patch it. And that may be perfectly acceptable, but it requires that trade-off. Somebody's going to weigh that trade-off, and it needs to be an educated, you know, decision. So I know I'm kind of long-winded on that one, but, and situational dictate. You know, if you're dealing with a small company, maybe you don't have it separated, but that would have to be a really small company. And unfortunately, in major Fortune, I'll say even up to, you know, Fortune 500s, it's usually security is very often a hidden function. Actually, anybody that's, you know, right now wants to work on a PhD or something, that would be a, you know, master's degree PhD would be a great thing to go off and research. Look at the Fortune 100 and see where their security is in relation to their IT and see how effective that is. I'd love to know the answer to that. A couple of quick things on malware, firmware boot kits. Again, I've touted this for years and years and years. Just because it's in firmware doesn't mean you can't hack it. And it's a great place if you're a bad guy, get into firmware, and it's almost impossible to get you out. This one happens to be about the UEFI BIOS type of firmware, but it's not limited to that. These types of attacks can go into the firmware still that's on other devices within the machine itself. Great place to hide, really tough to get a bad guy out of them. Because I know we're getting close on time here. Again, IoT devices, you know, somebody's out there looking for IoT devices. How unusual? Not. What made me shocked about this is, first one, cameras are being installed within networks with no password protection. Part of me says you deserve what you get. Another part of me goes, wait a second, this means that this camera has to be accessible from the internet. Why on God's green earth would you do that on top of not having a password? So interesting to play this game. The second highlighted area was a thing that, again, I see, and I highlighted it because, again, pet peeves. When I talk to people that do, threat hunting, the latest buzzwords, they tell me similar things. This attacker could be either unsophisticated, or it could be a really good APT that's trying to hide their abilities by acting like they're unsophisticated. Well, congratulations, you've described, any possible case out there. Of course it's going to be one of those two. That's kind of a no duh. So which is it, and why does it matter? How does that affect your incident response? Again, one of those pet peeves of mine. UK, looking at Huawei security, says, yeah, you're not doing what it takes to fix your vulnerabilities. I think the key thing here is, they're not saying that the issues were deliberately engineered, but the findings reflect poorly on its general competency in cybersecurity. And I think that's a good way of putting it. I have dealt with a lot of companies over the last 6 to 9 months in both blockchain technology and in some of the cloud apps. And it's amazing to me how many vulnerabilities we find that they look at it and go, yeah, it's got a vulnerability. It's got an old vulnerability from 2 years ago in that module. Yeah, when are you going to patch it? Well, boy, patching is really, we'll have to look and see if we're going to include it on the next version. I expect vendors to maintain their code. And if they're bringing in code from third parties, from open source, I'm okay with that. Maintain it. I shouldn't be your vulnerability assessment process. If I find a vulnerability, you've got a problem. And I think that's, unfortunately, I'm sure we'll hit on it later tonight, that's where a lot of companies in their software development are trending towards, is build things fast, build things quick, but we leave these holes, like proper, software development lifecycle, to include those third-party modules that we bring in.
Sorry, I had it muted, but I was cracking up when you said you were surprised that you're seeing these errors in blockchain projects. Have you talked to blockchain people?
Yeah, unfortunately a lot. And, yeah, there was one from, I had to explain to a certain blockchain company, and it's actually not a blockchain company. It's actually a major company here in the United States. I will keep the name out of it, out of respect for them at this point in time, because they are fixing problems. But they own several operating systems. There's a little hint. They've gotten into the blockchain world. That's great. When they sent us their blockchain product, we did our standard vulnerability scan on it, and we found problems. And we asked about some of the crypto problems that we saw. And, well, why would you want to have secure crypto? And what are we going to do? We don't know what we can do for secure crypto. I had to point out that they manufactured secure crypto modules. So it's like, why don't you go out your door, walk down the hall to this other group, and I'm sure they would be more than happy to give you your own product to use for this. Needless to say, there was a VP on the call. He was very embarrassed. And within 6 weeks, said vulnerabilities had been addressed, and they had changed their tune on software development lifecycle. But it took a meeting where they were trying to hold their ground, saying that they weren't right. They brought in a VP who then was very embarrassed by what we handed him. And I have no problem doing that. I will do that over and over again. But it showed to me that it's not just small companies. This was a major company. They know how to do software development. So off my soapbox for now.
There are small joys in life.
There are. I always like proving a VP wrong. That always makes me very happy, especially when it's not mine. We talked earlier about this. Paying ransomware could violate regulations. Here it is. If they're under economic sanctions, you could technically you could be sued because you're providing them aid. Now, my first question is how would I know that a ransomware attacker is North Korea or Iran? It's not like they advertise that. So for the United States Treasury to even kind of comment on this, my comment back to them is, okay, I agree. I shouldn't have to, you're right. I shouldn't be paying those people. How do I identify those people? Could you help me in identifying the ransomware gangs and tell me which ones are operating where? And then how about you help me stop them? And I'm sure that request will go unanswered. That's all I had. I'm a little over my time, so I hope it's not too bad. Oh, only 6 minutes.
All good. Perfect. So with that, if Chris is ready, we can transition to Dr. Chris Pearson, who's the founder and CEO of Black Cloak, who'll be doing his presentation. He's also the sponsor, his company. So